Okay, I'm back with you. I got my glasses on because I got to read something to you today. But I want to go back to where we left off in the last um, program, telecast, video, or whatever you want to call it. But before I go on with what I want to say, I want to recap just a little bit to bring us back up to speed so we can continue on together in the direction I want to take us. I think if you recall, the last time I spoke, I talked about the covenant. He will make a covenant with the many for 1 week or 7 years. This is really confusing right now because in the Middle East, there's this new peace plan, and all these nations are jumping onto it, and people that have followed a certain viewpoint can't make heads nor tails out of it. Is this the peace plan of Daniel 9:27 that it's talking about here? He will make a covenant with the many. And there are so many people that believe that there'll be a peace plan that'll be extended by the Antichrist at the end of the age, and wondering if this isn't that peace plan. The problem with that is it's been set in motion by President Trump and his administration. So that would mean that if this is the peace plan that people are assuming it's talking about there in Daniel 9:27, then that would make President Trump out to be the Antichrist. So I want to go back to this place and talk about the he there. Who is the he? Is that the Antichrist? Is that Jesus? Is that President Trump? Who's the he? And that's really important. And a lot hangs on the way we view things based upon the he. He will make a covenant. Well, first of all, the whole context of Daniel 9 is talking about enforcing a covenant, not making a covenant. The covenant was already made by Moses. We find it in the book of Deuteronomy. It's explained pretty extensively what that covenant is. So this covenant that everybody's talking about is not a peace covenant. It's a covenant made by Moses to the Jews, to the Hebrews, that they broke. They broke that covenant. And as a result of that, now God has to enforce the conditions of that covenant, which were, if you follow my law and do all these things, I'll bless you. But if you don't follow my law, then guess what? It's going to go bad for you. So now it's going bad. And the first going bad was the Babylonian invasion of Jerusalem and Israel. And they carried off the Jews for 70 years. And the book of Leviticus tells us, then if you don't learn your lesson, it's going to be 7 times 70. In other words, I'm going to take you to the woodshed for 70 years. Then if you don't get it right then, it'll be 490 years. And that's what the angel's telling Daniel. He's telling him, he's giving him a message saying, I got bad news now that you finished the 70, Daniel. It's going to be 7 times 70. And so when we get to Daniel 9:27, it says he will enforce a covenant or make strong a covenant, not make a peace covenant, but the enforcing of the Mosaic covenant, which is a judgment. It's a judgment. So what we're seeing in the Middle East, believe it or not, has nothing to do with this 490 years. It has nothing to do with President Trump. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy that people have been looking to build the temple for so long and reestablish the land of the Jews, blah, 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 blah. But this is not a peace covenant that's talked about in Daniel 9:27. So let's be really clear about context and not get into nuances and then blow it up like finding a little bone of a dinosaur and creating this gigantic thing that is a very imaginative, but not the truth of the facts of Scripture. Now, I want to take us on from this point because the he there is the prince that is to come. And the prince that is to come has nothing to do with Jesus. And it has everything to do with Daniel 10. There we see a war going on in the spiritual dimension. And it's the angel of the Lord fighting against the prince of Persia. Then he says, now I got to go fight against the prince of Grecia. And of course, we know how the history played out. Everybody should know that by now. But then the prince who is to come would be the prince of Rome. He, that prince, will enforce a covenant. What do you mean he's going to enforce a covenant? Well, God raised up the Babylonians to enforce the covenant of Moses, bringing about the wrath and judgment upon the Hebrews, upon Israel. Now he's going to use the Romans in the same way. He's going to use this prince of Rome to bring pressure to bear upon the Jews. Now, we want to pick up the action from that point. If you can follow along with that, not get all bent out of shape because you have a predisposed idea of what this means, then we can make some progress in how we see things. What's unfortunate about most people, they've been infected by something that happened in 1545, between 1545 and 1563, which was the Catholic Counter-Reformation. The Catholic Counter-Reformation was led by Jesuit priests who were defenders of the Pope and the Catholic Church. There was a man in the Catholic Church who was a Jesuit priest and a brilliant, brilliant deceiver. Brilliant. And what he did was create a doctrine that has infected pretty much all of Christendom. Almost 100% have been deceived by what he did. And I want to talk about what he did, but first I want to say this, and I'm going to prove it to you from why I'm wearing these glasses, because I have to read this to you, so to show you this academically, factually, not my own opinion. Now, when I was being raised, when I was a child in the faith, we had a great pastor. He's a great man. He wrote many Psalms. He loved the Lord, and he was a public phenomena and had a big following, huge church, had his own airplane, TV shows, and was always invited to speak at conferences. He was one of those kind of guys that's bigger than life. He's a little guy, but he had huge presence, and everybody, was mesmerized by this guy, and everybody couldn't wait to get to church to hear what he had to say. I was one of those people because I didn't know anything. I was an ignorant person without knowledge, not stupid, maybe a little stupid, but totally ignorant. And no matter what he said, I believed. In fact, after I had grown in the Lord for some time and then was beginning to prepare to go out and pastor, I had gone down to this denominational headquarters to learn how to start a Sunday school in the church I was pastoring. And I remember a young man there who had come from my church up in Eugene, Oregon. And he said, "What are you doing down here?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to learn how to start a Sunday school for kids." And he said, "Well, what does Roy say about that?" In other words, Roy was the name of the guy that was the pastor. What's his word about this? And I was struck that everybody listened to what this guy had to say. And it was like from God to us through this man, and whatever he said was infallible. And that's a dangerous thing to have in your mind if you don't have the kind of faith that can hear from the Lord yourself. But that's the way people thought in those days. And in fact, to this day, they do the same thing. What does he say? He wouldn't be happy about that. I went, "No, I don't know." Well, I just want to know what the Lord wants. I don't care what he has to say. That's not that he doesn't have some wisdom. Yeah, but it's got to be my personal faith where I make my decisions by. But one of the things he said, and what I want to bring up and why I want to launch off from this point, is that he said, "I am sure that God can keep an accurate record of his word throughout time. He can keep an accurate record of his word. He's so able to do that." And I want to show you today that God can't, from God's word, keep an accurate record of his word because men mess around with it. Men change words. They change contexts. There's alterations that happen, some purposefully, some just because of time and because of moving from one language to another. It takes a lot of work to find God's word, so we're not just taking at face value what we read, including those things from the Bible. Now, I'm not against the Bible. In fact, I'm going to read from the Bible. I just want to show you something that happened that affected people's eschatological view of Scripture. And it happened in 1545 by this guy named Rivera, and it was during the Catholic Reformation. Now, the Catholics were under severe attack by the Protestants, by Luther and the other reformers, and the Catholic Church was being condemned because of the indulgences and because of a lot of things that the priests were doing. So the Catholics had to have a counter-reformation. And in that Counter-Reformation, this guy Rivera came up with a brilliant idea on how to swerve people away from the attack. Now, that's what I want to talk about here, because that's the basis of showing you something from Scripture that's affected people's worldview. Now, recently, and if you can receive it, if you can listen to this and not be defensive and reactionary, you can grow. You can grow and gain some insight into how you must move forward with Christ in your own personal relationship with him. There was a putting up of a new lens on the Hubble spacecraft. And when they got it up there, they figured out that it was flawed. Now, can you imagine that? Billions of dollars spent to get that Hubble up there with the spacecraft and all that they did and all that they went through. And now they find out it's flawed. They just did a documentary on this. You should go look for it because it's really good. And it's a great metaphor. And they didn't know what to do. But the guy that put it up there figured it out. He said, I know how to fix this. So that's kind of where I'm at. I want to try to fix, I'm trying my best to try to fix your worldview based upon false interpretation of prophecy. And Jesus warned us of this. He said, many will come in my name saying these are the times. And he was talking about eschatological questions that his disciples said to him. And he said, many will be deceived. Don't be deceived. And that's all that's happened is great deception. And this comes from this guy who planted the seed in 1545, Rivera, the Jesuit priest, who created futurism. Futurism grew and finally made it to England. About 300 years later, it became firmly implanted in the Darby Brethren, Schofield, and it then became part of the doctrine of the Anglican Church, and then came to the United States through the Episcopalian Church, and then landed in Dallas Theological Seminary with John Walvoord. Hal Lindsey popularized the whole view in his book, The Late Great Planet Earth. But it's false doctrine. Believe it or not, it's false doctrine, even though almost 100% of the church believes in this. All right. So what I want to do is show you where this guy tampered with the Scriptures, and it's affected every modern translation. Okay. Are you with me? Okay. So what I want to do is read to you from the original language that comes from the Greek translation of the Hebrew called the Septuagint. This is what it says about Daniel 9:27. And he shall confirm the covenant. In other words, he'll make strong the covenant of Moses with many for 1 week. So there's a 7-year period of time at the end of Daniel's 70th week, 70 weeks, the last week of the 70, for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. That determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. Okay, so that's what it says there. But I want to read now from this New American Standard, the same text, and I want to show you the difference. And this New American Standard text has been affected by this Rivera's revision, which is false. It says this, and he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrificing grain offerings, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. He added 2 ones there. The one that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. The original language doesn't say it that way. So this guy Rivera added the second one. It's almost like he's talking about 2 different persons here. One that is decreed, and it's been interpreted, would be Jesus, is poured out on the one, Antichrist, who makes desolate. So that's what he was adding to keep people from understanding something very critical in terms of eschatology. And so I just wanted you to see the difference there, that God can't keep an accurate record, and especially when it comes to modern translations, because men like Rivera tampered with it and created a whole different idea about the end times, these last days. And yet most people look through that lens, one that is decreed, Jesus, poured out on the one that makes desolate. There's a lot of confusion he inculcated into the theologies of that time and then forward all the way to our time, and that this is what people go by. But really the context of Daniel 9 is about enforcing the covenant of Moses, first 70 years of destruction by the Babylonians, and then later would come a complete destruction to the end by the Romans in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed, Jerusalem was plundered, every tree for miles around was cut down. There was nothing left. There was nothing left. All the buildings, everything was gone. People had no idea that there was even a Jerusalem left when the Romans finished it. And according to Jesus, he said, when you see this take place and the temple destroyed like this, he called that the abomination of desolation that Daniel spoke of. Then flee, because then shall come a tribulation such as the world has never seen and never again shall see. And yet people still think the tribulation's in the future. But the tribulation began with the destruction of the temple of the Jews, which was 3.5 years into the last 7 years of Daniel's 70th week. That started in 66 when the Romans attacked Jerusalem and the temple, trying to break up a civil war between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and it escalated into this incredible destruction that the Romans finally brought upon the whole city and the temple. In fact, 3.5 years later, after the destruction, and of course the sacrifices ceased because there was no more priesthood that could function, there was no more temple that could function, and there was no way to fulfill Yom Kippur, which is coming up very soon, the Jewish high holidays. How do you keep Yom Kippur? Well, let's just fast now. That's the big way to adjust, because there's no way the high priest can go into the Holy of Holies and make atonement for sins on the day of Yom Kippur, which was once a year he was allowed to do that. He can't do that anymore. There's no temple. There's no possible way that you can fulfill Yom Kippur. So they fast, but that isn't the way it was ordained by God in the law. And so the temple had to be destroyed. God had to remove every semblance of any kind of way to adjudicate sin through a priesthood that was the Hebrew priesthood. There's a whole new priesthood now. Jesus set it up after the order of Melchizedek. We are the holy priesthood, a royal nation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, people for God's own possession. We are the priests of God now. We learn how to pray and minister in the heavenly tabernacle, and that's another teaching. But that temple had to be destroyed. It had to be taken out of the way. And there's a lot written about that in the book of Hebrews, which is other teachings. And I know I'm kind of waxing on here, but the point of it is that 3.5 years later, the war came to an end on Masada when the Romans captured the Jews up there. And Eleazar, the night before the Romans were able to invade, said, "Would that we had died in our city, because now all that's left is the fortress of Antonia, is the fortress of our enemy." And so the only thing that was left in Jerusalem after that complete destruction was the Romans' Antonia fortress, which was like an embassy. It was like the Roman embassy in Jerusalem. That's all that was left. And then the Jews were scattered to the nations of the world. They call the wilderness of the Gentiles. And for 2,000 years, they've been in the wilderness of the Gentiles. Many of us are still, I'm from a Jewish patriarchy, are still in the wilderness of the Gentiles. I live in California. Talk about a wilderness of the Gentiles. Oh my gosh. So that's what's happening. That's where we're at. And Daniel 9:27 has nothing to do with a peace covenant. And the beautiful deception, the beautiful corruption that's come into the world, the beautiful deceiver, where these Jesuit priests have created a doctrine that gave us a lens that's flawed, just like the Hubble spacecraft lens was flawed. So we'll go on next and talk about how Christ already fulfilled everything he spoke of in Daniel 9:24, and yet most of the church is still looking for the fulfillment of it. I want to talk to you about that next time.